The war that could not be won. The emergence of the Empire. The galaxy had never seen such darkness before. For centuries, the Galactic Alliance, a union of many alien civilizations, had maintained peace. Their fleets patrolled the stars, their leaders ensured diplomacy, and their warriors stood ready to protect their worlds. But then, from the farthest reaches of space, a terrible force emerged, the Salfor Dominion. No one knew exactly where they came from. Some believed they had been hiding in the void, building their strength in secret. Others whispered that they had destroyed their own homeworld long ago, becoming nomads with only one purpose: to conquer. The first attacks were swift and merciless. Entire planets fell in days. The Salfor ships, black as the void, moved like shadows through space. Their technology was advanced beyond anything the Alliance had ever seen. Their soldiers were not just warriors. They were hunters, designed for war, bred for destruction. General Torin Velkash stood on the bridge of his warship, watching the latest battle unfold on the holographic screen before him. Another fleet, another defeat. The Salfor had shattered their defenses again. He clenched his fists, his reptilian eyes narrowing as he turned to his officers. How many survivors? Commander Rylus, his second-in-command, hesitated before responding. Less than 20% of our forces escaped, General. The rest, they were annihilated. Torin Velkash exhaled sharply. He had seen war before, but never like this. The Salfor were not just winning battles, they were breaking the will of the galaxy itself. The Alliance's armies were dwindling, their fleets destroyed faster than they could be rebuilt. And the worst part, there was no hope. The Salfor did not negotiate. They did not ask for surrender. They conquered, enslaved, and moved forward, leaving nothing but ashes behind. Even the strongest Alliance worlds, those with powerful defenses and advanced weapons, had fallen. No one had been able to stop them. Torin turned to the massive window before him, gazing at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, the Salfor's next target awaited, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The Alliance's last stand. In the grand halls of the Alliance Council, the mood was grim. The leaders of the remaining free worlds gathered, their faces filled with despair. Some argued that they should flee, that they should abandon their homeworlds and hide in the depths of space. We cannot keep fighting, a gray-skinned senator from the Oran race said. His voice was tired, defeated. Every battle costs us thousands of ships, millions of lives. We cannot win against them. And what do you suggest? Snapped High Chancellor Virex, the leader of the council. That we surrender. That we bow before the Salfor like frightened children. There is no surrender. Another voice growled. The Salfor do not accept anything but total victory. We have all seen what they do to the planets they conquer. They will not spare us. A heavy silence filled the room. Everyone knew the truth. This war could not be won. But then, a voice from the shadows spoke. Perhaps there is still one option. All eyes turned to a lone figure standing at the edge of the room. Ambassador Celis, a diplomat from a small, unknown world, stepped forward. He was not like the other aliens in the room. He was different. He was human. The other council members frowned. Humanity was a young species. They had only recently joined the galactic stage. Compared to the great civilizations of the Alliance, they were primitive. Their technology was outdated, their fleets small. What could they possibly offer in this war? Celis met their skeptical gazes and spoke firmly. You say this war cannot be won because you have fought the same way for centuries. But humanity, we do not fight like you. High Chancellor Virex narrowed his eyes. And what do you propose, human? Celis took a slow breath. Give my people a chance. Let humans fight this war our way. A murmur spread through the chamber. The very idea was ridiculous. How could a species as young as humanity succeed where the greatest civilizations had failed? And yet, there was something in Celis's eyes, something different. a spark that the others had long lost. Hope. General Torin Velkash, who had remained silent until now, studied the human ambassador closely. He had fought alongside humans before, in smaller conflicts. He had seen how unpredictable they were, how they refused to fight by the rules. Perhaps that was exactly what they needed. "Very well," the general said at last. His voice was quiet, but firm. "Bring your warriors, human. Show us what they can do." The first steps of a revolution. Across the galaxy, humanity's war fleets began to move. Unlike the polished, noble warships of the Alliance, human warships were built for one purpose: destruction. Their tactics were not honorable. They did not fight grand, traditional battles in open space. They fought like predators. They struck in the dark, used deception, sabotage, and trickery. The first human-led battle against the Xalthor did not go as the enemy expected. It was a slaughter, but not for humanity. The Xalthor ships, used to dominating their enemies, found themselves hunted instead. Their command ships were hacked and turned against them. Their forces were cut apart by precision strikes. Their soldiers, who had never known fear, began to feel it for the first time. And across the galaxy, whispers began to spread. The war was not over yet. The humans had arrived. The arrival of humanity. The galaxy had never placed much faith in humanity. When Earth first joined the Galactic Alliance, many of the older, more advanced species viewed them as little more than a minor race, primitive, reckless, and far too emotional. Their technology was outdated, their fleet was small, and their history was filled with internal wars. But what the galaxy had failed to understand was that humanity thrived in war. A meeting of doubt and defiance. General Toran Velkash stood in the war chamber of the Alliance Council, watching as the representatives debated. The humans had arrived, but few truly believed they could change anything. "They are weak," scoffed Senator Krall, a feline-like alien from the Athenar Republic. "Their ships are outclassed. Their weapons are outdated. What can they do that we have not already tried?" Ambassador Celis, the human diplomat who had pushed for humanity's inclusion, did not react. Instead, he simply stepped aside as Admiral Ryan Carter entered the room. Carter was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp eyes that had seen too many battles. Unlike the rest of the Alliance officers, who wore flowing ceremonial robes or polished armor, Carter's uniform was simple, functional. He walked to the center of the chamber, placed a small holographic device on the table, and activated it. A battle simulation appeared, a star map showing Xalthor movements, past battles, and points of engagement. Then, Carter spoke. "You've been fighting the Xalthor the wrong way," he said. His voice was calm, but filled with certainty. "They are bigger, stronger, and more advanced. You try to match them in open combat, but you can't. That's why you lose." The room fell silent. Even Torin Velkash listened. "Humans don't fight fair," Carter continued. "We don't stand in neat battle lines and wait for the enemy to crush us. We hit where they're weak. We strike fast, disappear, and strike again. We spread chaos in their ranks. If they don't know where we're coming from, they can't stop us." Senator Curl scoffed. "Cowardly tactics. No honor." Carter turned to him and smirked. "Tell me, Senator, when your homeworld fell, did the Xalthor fight with honor?" Krall's ears flattened, and he said nothing. The first human offensive. The Alliance reluctantly gave humanity a single fleet, a test, they called it. If humans failed, they would be no worse off than before. Carter accepted without hesitation. The human fleet consisted of fast, heavily armed warships, not built for prolonged battles, but for quick, brutal engagements. Alongside them, human strike teams prepared to infiltrate enemy bases and cripple their supply lines. Their first target, the Xalthor outpost on 4-6, a heavily fortified command center in enemy-controlled space. The battle began with a deception. Human ships sent out a fake distress signal, pretending to be a damaged Alliance fleet fleeing from battle. The Xalthor, eager to finish them off, opened their defenses to intercept. That was their first mistake. As soon as the Xalthor ships moved, hidden human warships uncloaked from nearby asteroid fields, launching a devastating surprise attack. Their weapons struck with surgical precision, taking out enemy engines, communication relays, and power systems before they even had time to react. At the same time, human infiltration teams landed on the surface of Vor 6. Unlike Alliance soldiers, who charged in with brute force, humans fought like ghosts, hacking security systems, planting explosives, and turning enemy defenses against them. Within 2 hours, the outpost was in flames. The Xalthor, who had never lost a battle on their own territory, were forced to retreat. For the first time in the war, the Alliance had won a decisive victory. For the first time, the Xalthor felt fear. The ripple effect. News of the victory spread fast. In Alliance-controlled space, it was met with shock and disbelief. The same species that had been dismissed as unimportant had just done the impossible. General Toran Velkash stood in the war chamber, staring at the battle report. He read it twice, then a third time. It was no fluke. The humans had actually done it. He turned to Admiral Carter, who stood with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. "You did this with just a single fleet," Toran said slowly. "What could you do with more?" Carter's lips curled into a dangerous smile. "Give us the tools," he said, "and we'll give you the war." Toran Velkash made his decision. He turned to the Alliance leaders. "We need to change our strategy. The humans don't just fight differently. They fight to win." For the first time since the war began, there was hope. The humans were here, and the Xalthor had no idea what was coming for them. Unleashing chaos. The human way. The Xalthor Dominion was confused. For years, they had crushed every enemy that stood in their way. Their fleets were massive, their warriors unstoppable, their technology beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. But now, for the first time, they were losing. And the reason? A species they had barely noticed before, humans. A war unlike any other. The victory at Vor 6 had changed everything. The Galactic Alliance, once on the brink of collapse, suddenly had momentum. And humanity. They weren't done yet. Admiral Ryan Carter stood before a war map, surrounded by Alliance commanders. The aliens still didn't fully trust humanity, but they couldn't deny the results. "What's the next move?" asked General Toran Velkash, his reptilian eyes scanning the holographic display. Carter's answer was immediate. "We don't fight them head-on." The Alliance officers exchanged uneasy glances. That was how they had always fought. Massive fleets meeting in grand, decisive battles. "We don't fight fair," Carter continued. "The Xalthor rely on order, structure, and overwhelming force. We're going to take all of that and turn it against them." Toran narrowed his eyes. "How?" Carter grinned. "By making them bleed in ways they've never imagined." The ghosts of war. The next few months became a nightmare for the Xalthor. They had expected another large-scale battle. Instead, they faced a war with no rules. Supply lines vanished overnight. Human stealth ships infiltrated Xalthor-controlled sectors, striking at cargo freighters, fuel depots, and communication relays. Entire fleets found themselves stranded without reinforcements. Sabotage teams infiltrated enemy bases, hacking their security systems. Xalthor ships were hijacked and turned against their own fleets. Weapons misfired, shields shut down, and engines failed at the worst possible moments. Decoy signals and misinformation spread like wildfire. The Xalthor would receive distress calls from trapped human forces, only to find empty space or deadly ambushes waiting for them. They were being hunted. Human strike teams, heavily armed and unpredictable, would infiltrate enemy-controlled planets, assassinate high-ranking officers, and vanish before reinforcements arrived. The Xalthor, who had always believed in brute force, now faced an enemy that struck from the shadows, attacked where they were weakest, and refused to fight in open combat. They began calling humanity the ghosts of war. And worst of all, it was working. The first major retaliation. Realizing they were being outmaneuvered, the Xalthor changed tactics. Instead of chasing ghosts, they launched an overwhelming counterattack. A fleet of 10,000 warships gathered at Draco's Prime, an alliance stronghold that humanity had been using as a base of operations. The message was clear: destroy the humans. End this war. Alliance forces panicked. Draco's Prime was not ready for a siege. They were outnumbered 5-1. But Carter wasn't worried. "We want them to come," he said, standing on the bridge of his flagship. Toran Velkash stared at him, disbelief in his voice. "Are you insane? That's a death fleet." Carter smirked. "No, it's a trap." The battle that shook the galaxy. The Xalthor fleet arrived at Draco's Prime, weapons fully charged, expecting an easy victory. Instead, they found nothing. No massive fleets waiting for them. No planetary defenses, just silence. Confused but determined, the Xalthor pressed forward. That was their second mistake. Suddenly, their communication networks crashed. Their ships began shutting down. Alarms blared as Xalthor captains screamed for answers. It was human cyber warfare. A devastating virus had infiltrated their systems, spread through fake distress signals. Before they could recover, human warships decloaked all around them. EMP bombs disabled shields. AI-controlled drones swarmed enemy ships, overwhelming their defenses. Hacked capital ships turned on their own fleets, firing wildly into friendly formations. The battle turned into a massacre, but this time, the Xalthor were the victims. Realizing they had been outplayed, the Xalthor began retreating. For the first time in their history, they ran from battle. The aftermath. And the fear that followed. When news of Draco's Prime reached the rest of the galaxy, it changed everything. The Alliance, which had once doubted humanity, now rallied behind them. The Council officially placed human commanders in charge of military strategy. Meanwhile, within the Xalthor Dominion, fear spread. Entire fleets refused to go into battle against human-led forces. Commanders resigned rather than face the ghosts of war. The Xalthor High Lords, who had never known defeat, now saw their empire shrinking. For the first time since the war began, the Xalthor were afraid. But humanity wasn't finished yet. Because now they were preparing for the final strike. The desperate counterattack. The Xalthor Dominion had never tasted defeat before. But now they were bleeding. Humanity had turned the war upside down. Their unconventional tactics had crippled supply lines, dismantled enemy fleets, and shattered the illusion of Xalthor superiority. For the first time in history, the Xalthor were losing. And that was something their leaders could not allow. A council of war. Deep in the heart of the Xalthor Empire, the High Lords gathered in a vast chamber of black stone and glowing red energy. They were the rulers of the Dominion, ancient, powerful, and ruthless. High Lord Vakor, the supreme warlord, stood at the center, his massive form towering over the others. His crimson eyes burned with fury. "The humans have infected this war like a disease," he growled. "We must purge them." The other lords murmured in agreement, their clawed hands tapping against the stone table. "They do not fight like warriors," one spat. "They strike from the shadows. They are cowards." High Lord Vakor's claws scraped against the table. "Then we shall drag them into the light." A holographic map of the galaxy flickered to life before them. The High Lords had devised a new plan, one that would force humanity into open battle, where they would be crushed once and for all. Their target, Terra. The trap is set. The Xalthor knew that humanity fought differently. They didn't play by the same rules. So instead of chasing them, the Xalthor lured them in. A massive distress signal was sent from the Oran system, an Alliance sector that had recently been liberated by human forces. The message was clear. A Xalthor fleet was about to obliterate the system. If humanity truly cared about its new allies, they would come. And when they did, they would find themselves walking into the largest Xalthor ambush in history. 10,000 warships, 10 million soldiers, a fleet so large it blotted out the stars. Humanity's response. When the distress signal reached Admiral Ryan Carter, he knew something was wrong. The Xalthor never gave warnings. They struck fast, without mercy. This signal, it was bait. And yet, humanity had no choice. If they abandoned the Auran system, the Xalthor would butcher every living soul. The Alliance would lose faith in humanity, and the momentum they had built would vanish. Carter stood in the war room, staring at the holographic map. Around him, Alliance commanders watched in tense silence. Finally, he spoke. "We go." Gasps filled the room. Even General Toren Vel-Cash looked shocked. "It's an obvious trap," the general said. "They're expecting us." Carter's lips curled into a small, dangerous smile. "Good." Toren narrowed his eyes. "Why is that good?" Carter turned to his officers. "Because they think they're setting a trap for us." He tapped the map. "But what they don't realize is that we're setting a trap for them." The battle begins. The human fleet jumped into the Auran system, emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation. The tide turns. The Xalthor had expected a straightforward battle. They expected humanity to fight like the Alliance. But they should have known better. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of the HSS Warbringer, his flagship. Around him, screens flickered with incoming enemy data. The Xalthor sent a transmission, their deep, guttural voice echoing across the comms. "You should not have come, human." Carter smirked. "I was thinking the same thing about you." And then he sprang the real trap. The tide turns. The Xalthor had expected a straightforward battle. They expected humanity to fight like the Alliance. But they should have known better. As soon as the Xalthor fleet advanced, dozens of cloaked human ships decloaked behind them, cutting off their retreat. EMP mines detonated, disabling entire squadrons of enemy ships before they could fire a single shot. AI-controlled drone swarms flooded the battlefield, overwhelming Xalthor defenses with relentless precision. And then came the worst blow. Sleeper agents within the Xalthor fleet, infiltrators who had been embedded for months, hijacked key warships and turned them against their own forces. The Xalthor fleet collapsed from within. The Xalthor's last stand. As their fleet fell apart, the Xalthor commanders screamed for reinforcements. But no help came. For the first time in their history, the Xalthor realized what true fear felt like. The humans had planned for this. They had let the Xalthor believe they were in control, only to tear them apart from the inside. One by one, Xalthor warships detonated, their commanders forced to watch as their great fleet crumbled to dust. The few who survived turned and fled, leaving the battlefield in complete chaos. The battle was over, and humanity had won. The aftermath, and the ultimate consequence. The victory at Auran system sent shockwaves through the galaxy. For the first time, the Xalthor had suffered a defeat so devastating, their entire empire trembled. Their fleets were in ruins, their supply lines had collapsed, their armies were scattered, and worst of all, the Galactic Alliance now believed in humanity. Admiral Carter stood in the war chamber, surrounded by Alliance leaders who once doubted him. They no longer saw humans as a minor species. They saw them as the future of this war. General Toren Vel-Cash approached Carter and extended his hand. "I did not believe in your kind at first. I do now." Carter shook his hand. "Good, because we're not finished yet." High Chancellor Virex, the leader of the Alliance, stood before them all. "This war will not end until the Xalthor are broken completely." Carter's eyes darkened. "Then let's finish it." The battle that shook the galaxy. The war had changed. For the first time in history, the Xalthor Dominion was no longer the unstoppable force of the galaxy. For the first time, they were the ones running. The battle at Auran System had shattered their confidence, their fleets left in ruins, their command structure in disarray. Across the Dominion, entire fleets hesitated before engaging human-led forces. Fear had begun to spread. But the Xalthor were not defeated yet. High Lord Vokor, the supreme warlord of the Dominion, was not willing to let his empire fall. He summoned the last of his remaining elite war fleets and made a decision. They would strike at the heart of the Alliance. They would crush humanity in a battle so decisive it would end the war in one blow. The target? Dracos Prime, the last great offensive. Dracos Prime was one of the last major strongholds of the Galactic Alliance. It had become the center of human military operations, a staging ground for new offensives against the Dominion. If the Xalthor could take it, the war would swing back in their favor. The Xalthor didn't just send a fleet. They sent everything they had left. Over 15,000 warships, hundreds of thousands of ground troops, planet-cracking weapons capable of turning entire worlds to dust. It was the largest fleet the Dominion had ever assembled. As the Xalthor Armada approached, all Alliance forces received the same message from Admiral Carter. This is it. They're bringing everything. If we lose here, we lose everything. Stand firm. Hold the line. Humanity will not fall. The calm before the storm. On the bridge of the HSS Warbringer, Carter stood before the holographic display, watching the massive enemy fleet advance. Around him, officers worked furiously to coordinate the defense. General Torin Velkash stepped up beside him. "Are we ready?" Carter's face was unreadable. This was the fight that would decide the fate of the galaxy. "We don't have a choice," he said. Across the system, human and Alliance fleets took formation. Battlecruisers hovered above the planet, their guns locked onto the incoming enemy. Thousands of fighter squadrons prepared for launch. Planetary defenses powered up, ready to unleash hell. Then the alarms blared. The Xalthor had arrived. The battle begins. The Xalthor fleet poured into the system like a tidal wave of death. Their warships advanced in massive organized formations, their weapons glowing with the energy of their planet-destroying cannons. Then they opened fire. Thousands of energy blasts tore through space, striking at the human and Alliance defenses. The first wave of ships exploded instantly, reduced to burning wrecks. But humanity did not break. "Return fire," Carter roared. The Alliance fleet responded with a devastating counterattack. Railgun rounds the size of buildings tore through Xalthor capital ships. Eye-guided missiles locked onto enemy weak points, detonating inside their hulls. EMP bombs disabled entire squadrons, leaving them vulnerable to attack. The battle raged like a storm, ships exploding in fiery bursts as the two greatest forces in the galaxy clashed in the void. And then the ground invasion began. The war on the surface, while the battle in space raged. Thousands of Xalthor dropships rained down onto Dracos Prime. The moment they hit the surface, all hell broke loose. Human and Alliance troops dug in, fighting with everything they had. Massive walker tanks stormed through the streets, firing plasma rounds that melted Xalthor armor. Urban warfare turned every building into a battlefield, every street into a war zone. Humanity fought like cornered wolves, vicious, relentless, and impossible to kill. But the Xalthor kept coming. They had brought their most elite soldiers, warriors bred and trained for nothing but war. For every Xalthor soldier that fell, two more took its place. Slowly, humanity began to be pushed back. The turning point, high above the planet, Admiral Carter watched as the battle tilted in the Xalthor's favor. Human ships were being torn apart. Ground forces were being overwhelmed. They were losing. Torin Velkash turned to Carter, his expression grim. "We can't hold out much longer." Carter clenched his fists. His mind raced, searching for a solution. There was only one option left. A desperate final gamble. Carter turned to his officers. "Prepare the superweapon." The room fell silent. The Excalibur cannon, a human-engineered prototype, was a planetary-scale railgun capable of firing a single shot powerful enough to pierce an entire fleet. It had never been used in real combat before. And if it failed, they were doomed. The final shot. The order was given. The Excalibur cannon began to charge, its power levels rising to dangerous levels. The entire planet shook as the weapon prepared to fire. The Exalthor fleet realized what was happening. They moved to stop it. Enemy warships rushed toward the cannon's position, unleashing everything they had. Human and Alliance ships moved to block them, sacrificing themselves to buy time. The weapon reached 100% charge. Carter clenched his jaw. Fire. A single blinding beam of energy erupted from the planet's surface, slicing through space like the wrath of a dying god. It tore through the Exalthor fleet, splitting capital ships in half, obliterating entire squadrons, and piercing through the enemy flagship, the command center of the entire invasion force. High Lord Vokor had just enough time to realize what had happened before his ship detonated in a blinding explosion. Their leader was dead. And with that, the Exalthor broke. The aftermath, and the beginning of the end. The remaining Exalthor forces, leaderless and in chaos, began retreating. The war was over. Draco's Prime had held. Humanity had won. Across the galaxy, news of the victory spread. The once invincible Exalthor dominion was now shattered and crumbling. Admiral Carter stood on the battlefield, staring at the burning wreckage of the enemy fleet. This was the moment that changed everything. General Torin Vel-Cash approached, his expression filled with something that could only be described as respect. "You did it," he said. "You saved the galaxy." Carter exhaled. "Not yet." Torin frowned. "What do you mean?" Carter's eyes darkened. "This war isn't over," he said. "Not until the Exalthor are wiped out for good." And with that, humanity prepared for its final move. The hunt for the Exalthor had just begun. Humanity's final gambit. The war should have ended. The Exalthor Dominion had suffered its greatest defeat at Draco's Prime. Their fleet was shattered, their supreme warlord Vokor was dead, and their forces were retreating across the galaxy. And yet, they were not finished. Even in defeat, the Exalthor refused to surrender. They had fled to Exaltorak, their homeworld, a fortress planet buried deep within the heart of their empire. From there, their remaining warlords had gathered their last armies, preparing for a final stand. Humanity had two choices: leave them alone, let them rebuild, and wait for them to rise again in the future. End the war, completely. Admiral Ryan Carter had already made his choice. He wasn't going to let the Exalthor recover. He was going to finish what they started. The plan: a suicide mission. The Galactic Alliance leaders gathered for one last war council. A hologram of Exaltorak flickered before them, a planet surrounded by endless defense systems, orbital stations, and massive fleets. It was an impenetrable fortress. "Attacking Exaltorak is suicide," one of the alien commanders argued. "No fleet has ever breached its defenses." Admiral Carter folded his arms. "Then we won't do it with a fleet." Silence filled the room. General Torin Vel-Cash frowned. "What do you mean?" Carter's expression was grim. "We send in one team. A small infiltration force. We get to the planet, slip past their defenses, and take out the Exalthor leadership from the inside." The room erupted into chaos. "This is madness," a senator shouted. "You expect a handful of soldiers to do what entire armadas have failed to accomplish." Another protested. Carter let them argue. Then he spoke calmly. "Every time we fought the Exalthor head-on, we lost. Every time we hit them where they didn't expect, we won." His voice hardened. "This war is about strategy, not brute force. If we cut off the head, the body dies." Torin Velkash watched Carter closely. The human wasn't wrong. And so, the final mission was approved. A team of elite human soldiers, the best warriors in the Alliance, would infiltrate Uxal Torek and end the war once and for all. This was humanity's final gambit. The infiltration of Xaltorek. A single, cloaked human stealth ship slipped into Xal-4 space, bypassing patrols and automated defenses. Inside, a team of 10 soldiers, each handpicked for the mission, prepared for the most dangerous operation in galactic history. Among them, Captain Elias Rook, a ruthless, battle-hardened operative. Lieutenant Sarah Voss, an expert in cyber warfare and infiltration. Sergeant Dax, a heavy weapons specialist with nerves of steel. And leading them, Admiral Ryan Carter himself. They couldn't afford to fail. Their objective: infiltrate the Xal-4 capital, locate the remaining warlords, and eliminate them. Inside enemy territory, the team descended through the smog-filled skies of Xaltorek, using stolen enemy codes to land undetected in an abandoned sector of the city. The planet was a nightmare of war factories and towering fortresses, its air thick with pollution and the scent of burning metal. Xal-4 patrols stalked the streets, searching for intruders. But humans had always been good at stealth. Moving like shadows, the team infiltrated the city, using hacked security networks and silent takedowns to avoid detection. As they moved deeper, the scale of the Xal-4's desperation became clear. They were building something. Something massive. The Xal-4's doomsday weapon. Deep within the capital, Carter and his team found a secret war facility, unlike anything they had seen before. Inside, they discovered the truth. The Xal-4 were building a superweapon, a planet-killing weapon, designed to wipe out Earth and every major Alliance world in a single attack. If humanity had waited, if they had given the Xal-4 time to recover, this weapon would have ended everything. "We don't have time," Carter growled. "We destroy this now." The final battle. The team planted explosives across the facility, setting a countdown for detonation. But the Xal-4 had sensed the intrusion. The ground shook as enemy warriors poured into the facility, weapons blazing. The human team fought like demons, using every trick, every tactic, every brutal strategy they had learned in the war. Sergeant Dax unleashed a barrage of explosives, collapsing tunnels, and trapping enemy reinforcements. Lieutenant Voss hacked enemy weapons, turning them against their own soldiers. Carter and Rook fought side by side, cutting through the Xal-4 warlords themselves. Blood and fire filled the air. And then, the charges detonated. A massive explosion ripped through the war facility, consuming the weapon, the warlords, and the last hope of the Xal-4 dominion. Xaltorek began to fall, the end of the Xal-4. As the team fought their way to the extraction point, the skies above them burned. The Xal-4 were leaderless. Their empire was collapsing. Entire fleets mutinied. Civil war erupted among their surviving commanders. And across the galaxy, the word spread. The war was over. Humanity had done what no other species had ever done. They had defeated the Xal-4 dominion. A new dawn. Admiral Carter and his team returned to Alliance space as heroes. The war was finally over. As he stood before the Galactic Council, Carter spoke the words that would define the future of the galaxy. The Xal-4 thought they were the strongest force in the universe, but they never understood what real strength was. He turned to the gathered leaders. It isn't about weapons or fleets. It's about determination. It's about never giving up. That's what makes humanity different. A pause. And then Carter smiled. They thought they could break us. But you can't break humanity. The rise of humanity. The war was over. The Xal-4 dominion, once the most feared empire in the galaxy, was gone. Their fleets were shattered, their leaders dead, and their homeworld in ruins. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was free. But now came the question that everyone feared to ask. What happens next? The aftermath of war. The fall of the Xalthor sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Entire star systems, once under Xalthor rule, suddenly found themselves without leadership. Surviving Xalthor warlords fought among themselves, turning their once mighty empire into a chaotic war zone. The Galactic Alliance stood at a crossroads. Would they try to rebuild the broken territories, or would they leave them to their fate? And then there was the biggest question of all. What role would humanity play in the new order? Humanity's choice. Admiral Ryan Carter stood before the Galactic Council, the leaders of the Alliance watching him in silence. It was humanity's moment of triumph. They had done the impossible. They had won a war that no one believed could be won. Now, the other races looked to them for guidance. Some feared them. Some respected them. But no one ignored them anymore. Carter took a deep breath. He knew what the Council wanted, to make humanity the new rulers of the galaxy. But that wasn't what humanity had fought for. We did not fight this war for power, Carter said. We fought because we refused to let tyranny rule this galaxy. He looked around the room. Humanity will not become conquerors. We will not become the next Xalthor. Murmurs spread through the council. Some seemed relieved, others confused. Carter continued, his voice firm. But we will never let this happen again. He stepped forward. We will stand as protectors. We will defend those who cannot defend themselves. And if another threat rises, a pause. We will be ready. The council chamber erupted into applause. And in that moment, humanity's place in the galaxy was decided. They were no longer a minor species. They were no longer overlooked. They had become the defenders of the stars. The fate of the Xalthor. Even in defeat, the Xalthor survivors refused to go quietly. Across the galaxy, scattered remnants of their forces waged desperate wars, trying to reclaim their lost empire. But they would never rise again. One by one, they were hunted down by the Alliance, by the freed worlds they had once enslaved, and by humanity itself. The once mighty Xalthor dominion became nothing more than a memory. A new galactic era. With the war over, the Galactic Alliance began to rebuild. Former Xalthor slave worlds were freed, their people given a chance to govern themselves for the first time in generations. The Alliance expanded, with new planets and species joining under the promise of protection and unity. Human technology spread, as other civilizations adopted the tactics and strategies that had saved them all. And for the first time in history, the galaxy was truly united. Because they all knew the truth now. If another war came, if another empire tried to rise, humanity would be there. The legacy of humanity. Admiral Ryan Carter stood on the bridge of the HSS Warbringer, staring out at the stars. The galaxy had changed, and so had humanity. They were no longer just a single species on a small planet in a forgotten corner of space. They were now a force that could not be ignored. They had proven their strength, their resilience, their refusal to be broken. And now they would shape the future. Because the one thing every species in the galaxy had learned was this: never underestimate humanity.